In this lecture, we'll refactor our teddy bear destruction game to use an event and an event handler. The event manager in this example is more robust than the event manager we saw in the previous lecture because it allows multiple invokers and multiple listeners for the event. Here's a reminder about how the teddy bear destruction game works. When I play the game, it spawns teddy bears, and when I get the mouse over them, I gain points from destroying the teddy bears. I had to blow one up too. So that's how the game works. Let's go look at the code. Remember, we have a teddy bear destruction gameplay manager, if you will, but really this just does what our typical HUD does. I have score text and the actual score. And in start, I set my score text to score followed by 0. Then I have a public add points method that adds points to the score and changes the text. And if I right click add points and find all references, we can see that all three of the concrete classes, the burning teddy bear, disappearing teddy bear, and exploding teddy bear, all call the add points method to add points. The parent class in that hierarchy, the teddy bear class, has a protected field to hold a reference to a teddy bear destruction object, and that's the object that those child classes are using to call the add points method. The bad part about this design is that the teddy bear class has to know about the gameplay manager, and we would prefer that it not. We would prefer that the teddy bear class just know that it's a teddy bear, and instead of providing a reference to this gameplay manager object that all the child classes actually use to add points for the player, we would prefer that we could just invoke an event and the teddy bear destruction gameplay manager would listen for that event, and then the teddy bears don't have to know anything about their place in the bigger game world. So let's refactor this code to use an event and an event manager. I've added two scripts to our game. I've added a points added event and the event manager. So let's look at the points added event first. As you can see, we inherit from the version of the Unity event that has a single parameter, that's an int, and that int will be the number of points we want added to our score. Our event manager is more robust than the event manager from the previous lecture, and that's because we now have a list of teddy bears as invokers and a list of Unity action ints as listeners. We know that there are probably more than one teddy bear in the game at any particular time, and each of those teddy bears can invoke our points added event. So we have to have a way to store more than one invoker in our event manager. And a list is a good collection class for us to use to do that, so we'll have a list of teddy bears as our invokers of this event. We actually know that we only have one listener for the event in this particular game. It's the teddy bear destruction script. But once we have a list for invokers, we might as well just use a list for listeners as well, and vice versa. We could have an event that has a single invoker and multiple listeners, so we'd need a list of listeners, and it makes sense to have lists for both the invokers and the listeners for a particular event if we need a list for at least one of them. So that's what I've done here. And that's an extension of the event manager that we saw last time, because here we can have multiple invokers and multiple listeners for the event. We have two public methods in the event manager. The first one adds a teddy bear as an invoker, and the way we start doing that is we add the new teddy bear invoker to our list of invokers using the add method. And then, just as we needed to do previously, we may have one or more listeners that have already said they'd like to listen for this event. And if we do, we need to add each of those listeners to this invoker as a listener for the event that this invoker may invoke. We don't have to check for null anymore because we're using a list. We can just use a for each loop that goes across all the listeners that have been added so far and adds each of those listeners to the invoker. And you can see I have commented out this line of code at this point so that my code will compile, because teddy bear at this point doesn't implement an add listener method. We'll take care of that soon, but we haven't taken care of that yet. The add listener method looks really similar. This time our parameter is a unity action with a single int parameter, and we add that handler to our list of listeners, and then we do a for each loop across all the invokers that have added themselves to the event manager so far, and we add that listener to each of the invokers. Again, with this commented out code because I haven't implemented this method in the teddy bear yet. Speaking of the teddy bear, let's go start refactoring the teddy bear to support using the event manager in the points added event. The first thing we'll do is we'll change this field from being a reference to a teddy bear destruction object to being a points added event object instead. And we need to create a new object for that event at this time as well by using the standard calling a C# constructor to create this object. In start, we need to change this code, which used to get a reference to the teddy bear destruction script. We don't need that anymore, but we do need to tell the event manager that this teddy bear is an invoker of the points added event. So I'll get rid of this line of code, and instead I'll add myself as an invoker, and as I said, I'll add myself as an invoker. And the way we do that is by using the this keyword, which remember is a reference to this object. I know that the teddy bear is an abstract class, so we can't actually make a teddy bear object, but remember all the child classes inherit from teddy bear, so all the child classes will in fact be executing this start method, and when they do, they'll add themselves as the actual concrete C# object as the invoker to the event manager. I'd like to uncomment that code that I have in the event manager, so I'm going to come down here, and this particular method I'm going to add needs to be public, so I'll add a new region. And it will be public void add listener. Remember, we want to add listeners that are unity action with one int parameter, and I'll just call it listener. And I'll add my documentation comment before I fill in the body of the method. And here in the body of the method, I'll say points added event. And this is a great suggestion, so I'll just tab away and say I want to call the add listener method that I inherit, or that points added event inherits from unity event with one int parameter. And I'll pass in the parameter that was passed in here to add the listener to my points added event. Now I can come back to the event manager and get rid of those comments. And when I compile, I'm not quite done yet, because in each of my child classes, I'm still calling the teddy bear destruction add points method, and I can't do that anymore. What I need to do instead is take the points added event and invoke it. So instead of calling a method directly in the teddy bear destruction script, I can invoke the event instead. So I'll change the burning teddy bear, the disappearing teddy bear, and the exploding teddy bear to all invoke the event instead. So let's compile and see how this all works. And I will freely admit I have deliberately made a mistake, because you may make the same mistake, and I want to show you the process for recognizing that we made that mistake. So if I run the game, I can actually destroy teddy bears, but I don't get points for that anymore. When that happens, there are really two possibilities. Either we're never invoking the event, or nobody's listening for the event. So I know which of those two the answer is. Because we just added code to invoke the event, let's go to the event manager and right-click on Add Listener and say Find All References, which will show us who actually calls the Add Listener method. And it turns out that nobody does. Teddy Bear Destruction is the class that should. So add as listener for event. So we're calling a method in the event manager, and this time it's the add listener method. And we want to add our add points method as a listener for that event. As a matter of fact, now that we've done that, we can actually make add points private rather than public, because no consumers of the class now call this method directly. I know that the event will call this method directly, but that's because it has a reference to where this method actually lives in memory, so it doesn't actually have to use a public method to call it. Our code compiles again just fine, and when we come back and play our game this time, I actually get points for destroying teddy bears. So our game behaves exactly the way it did before, but our refactoring has led to a better object-oriented design, specifically because the teddy bear no longer needs to know about the Teddy Bear Destruction class. To recap, in this lecture you learned how to implement an even more robust event manager that supports having multiple invokers and multiple listeners for an event.